Bienvenue. My name is Renee Ketchum, and welcome to AFUSA's conversation on art dealer Berthe Weill's contribution to French art history, a conversation with Lynn Gumpert and Beth Gersh-Nesic. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 26,000 learners of French learn French, live French, and love French with the Alliance Française. And watch out for a little video, please. As chair of the Cultural Offerings Committee, I am so thrilled to just give you a sneak peek at what's coming up. French Cinematheque on Monday, on the 24th, will feature the new film, The Count of Monte Cristo, which was an enormous commercial success in France, and I think is up for 12 Césars. We then have the Rebel Empresses, Book Talk, and Les Filles du Roi. And again, many film and cultural events that you will all enjoy. So please go to www.afusa.org and learn more and sign up. Just a few logistics before we start. Please stay on mute during the presentation, stay on speaker view, and please put all questions in the chat. I will revisit the chat after our conversation. And if there are technical issues, please sign back in after a couple of minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel, and the total runtime is 1 hour. So I am honored today to introduce Lynn Gumpert, director of New York University's Gray Art Museum for the past 25 years. During Lynn's tenure, the Gray has presented over 75 exhibitions, including Americans in Paris, Artists Working in Post-War France, 1946 to 1962, in March and July 2024. Lynn Gumpert has overseen and organized exhibitions on 4 continents. Beth Gersh-Nesic, I think many of us know and love Beth. She is the director of the New York Arts Exchange and Arts Education Service. Beth is a staff writer with Bonjour Paris, and her books and articles focus on Picasso, the School of Paris, women artists, and the poet art critique André Salmon, who wrote about several artists on review in the Berthe Weill exhibition at the Gray. So welcome. We're looking so forward to this conversation on this really extraordinary exhibit at the Gray.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, AFUSA, for this extraordinary opportunity to talk with Lynn Gumpert about one of the most important people in the history of modern art, and that is Berthe Weill, which for everybody is a great surprise. Where has she been in plain view? But before we start talking about one of the most important women in the past, I want to talk about Lynn. So we're going to start with our slides and do a little bit of going down memory lane with Lynn. So first of all, please tell us what prompted you to become part of the arts profession.
I took my first classes in art history when I was a student at Berkeley as an undergrad. And there's one book I remember in particular, which I assume many of the folks listening in might have read, which was Banquet Years by Roger Shattuck, which absolutely fascinated me, that the artists knew the musicians who knew the poets, and they all hung out together. So that was a major impetus.
And then you have this wonderful background. So you came from California all the way to New York, which takes a lot of courage. What was your first job in New York?
I should say that, also a formative experience was attending the École du Louvre in Paris for 1 year, and also taking French lessons at the Sorbonne. It was not part of any program. I just embarked and arrived and found out and was able to share an apartment with a Japanese woman and a French woman on Avenue de Saxe, and neither of whom spoke English. So that was a good, intense period for me. And then coming from the West Coast, seeing all the art in the Louvre and being in those rooms and on a daily basis was fantastic. So moving to New York, my first job was actually at the Jewish Museum. I was a curatorial assistant, and I worked there for 2 years before I became a curator at the new museum. And you have a catalog from my days at the new museum.
And this is one of the groundbreaking exhibitions, because I do recall, people don't remember, but Elian Golub had a very important career in the 60s, the 70s. It was kind of a sleeper. And you really brought back the figure and the importance of this movement in the 1980s. It started to resurge. So you are a maverick, just like Berthe Weill. And also, I want everyone to know that you are a chevalier for the Legion of Honor, which is also extraordinary. From 1999, I mean, this is not just yesterday because of Berthe Weill. So congratulations. We're
Thank you.
Just so proud and honored to be in your presence. So let's talk about, because of Berthe Weill, I want everyone to know how important you've been to our arts community. You are an important force. So just to also mention a little bit, what made you interested in Christian Baltansky? Because
Well, I think it was
another.
Sure. The year I spent in Paris in 71 to 72 was, as I mentioned, very critical. And in terms of Christian, I did go to the 1982 Documenta, which is held every 5 years in Kassel, Germany. That's this broad survey of contemporary art. And I remember seeing a number of works that were very kind of conceptually oriented at that show. And in New York, in those days, in the early 80s, all we saw was neo-expressionist painting. So I decided I wanted to find out more what was happening in Europe, and started some research trips and ended up doing a show of more conceptually oriented artists, a group show. But when I was doing these studio visits in France, I was introduced to Christian, made a studio visit, and was blown away. It was right when he was starting his beautiful Lessons of Darkness work. And he was a senior artist. He wasn't appropriate for the group show I was doing, but I was with a colleague, Mary Jane Jacob, and I said, you have to see this work. And together we decided to do a solo show.
And here, I just want people to know you're a great writer.
Thank you.
Just so many things to celebrate for you. Do you feel, when you were going through this period with 10 years with Berthe Weill, somehow, I mean, you are connected, spiritually connected. You have the same way of just jumping into looking for artists whose reputations may not have surfaced to the grandstands. So I really want people to understand we are really fortunate to have you here, and we know that Berthe Weill and this period right now is your swan song for Grey Art Gallery.
Well, I'm stepping down in mid-April, but and actually relocating to Paris. But I will be continuing to work independently, which I had done for 9 years before starting at the Grey. So I'm looking forward to two more projects, and I am immensely grateful for the 28 years I spent at the Grey. It's an amazing small university museum in the middle of one of the world's art capitals. So it's been extraordinary experience for me. And I love working with the students. I love the fact that we're a university museum, that we have a collection. And yes, I mean, I did identify with Berthe when I first was introduced to her by the art historian Julie Saul, who was the first to mention Berthe's name to me. And I identified from my days also as a curator at the New Museum, where we were also searching out and looking for young emerging artists. So there was that immediate connection, definitely. And then, of course, I am a Francophile. So I loved just this notion of this feisty woman who against all odds, forged, a role for herself and was able to realize her dreams. And very sadly, this is just we're just about a week past the 3rd anniversary of Julie's death. She died very tragically 3 years ago. But she was the one who had read Michael Fitzgerald's book about Picasso and the art market, which mentioned that the first dealer to sell works by Picasso was a woman named Berthe Weill. And then there was a footnote saying the only information we have on her is her memoir, Pendant l'Oeil, or what we translated as Pow Right in the Eye. So I'm happy to say that Julie and I were able to write the preface for this English translation of Pendant l'Oeil, which was published by the University of Chicago in 2022. And I want to give a shout out to William Rodamore, who is a translator extraordinaire, who tackled the vernacular and the inside jokes and Berthe's very quirky sense of humor. And, Berthe never had formal schooling. She's really an autodidact. She was totally self-taught. And she wrote in a very vernacular French, very much unlike her colleague Ambroise Vollard, whose Recollections of a Picture Dealer comes out 3 years after Berthe publishes Pendant l'Oeil, or POW.
And we have, this is the original cover and then the cover of the translation. And then, as you pointed out to me, one can access the manuscript for the original from the archives. Now, the archives have been organized by your co-curator. So tell us a little bit about how did you find Marianne Le Morvan?
Yeah, this is a really fun story, and the show absolutely would not have taken place without Marianne's involvement and expertise and scholarship. So Julie had mentioned Berthe Weill to me around 2014, and I became that she was going out to MoMA's library to read the original French. And she said, clearly this needs to be translated and I'd like it to be annotated and illustrated. And I said, I agree 100%, but I also think it could be a fabulous exhibition. So we were very, very fortunate early on to get a major research grant from the David Berg Foundation. So thanks to Michelle Tochi, which gave us the means to travel to Paris and meet with Marianne. And what I just learned not too long ago was Marianne had read the same passage in Michael Fitzgerald's book that Julie did, and also became curious about who was this woman who was an art dealer who sold the first works by Picasso, who gave Modigliani a solo, his only solo show during his lifetime, who introduced Diego Rivera. Who is this woman and why don't we know more about her? So we went to Paris in November 2015 and met with Marianne and introduced ourselves. And I explained that, we were a small but fearless museum. And we would love to work with her on doing an exhibition. So Marianne has, and so it's Marianne, actually. If any of you have visited the show, you'll see we have these wonderful vitrines filled with ephemera and letters and Berthe's spectacles and invitations and the small pamphlets she published. And those were all assembled by Marianne. There were no papers. Berthe emerges from the war. She survives. but she's sold her collection. She's very impoverished. There are no papers that we were aware of. And it's through Marianne's constant research and frequenting of the bouquiniste along the Seine and getting to know the bookstore owners, secondhand bookstore owners, to say, if you get materials on Berthe, I want to know, please, let me know. So she assembled the archives.
This is, and it's amazing. It's really, for anybody who wants to dive into it, it's really a treasure test. So let's look at the show, okay? So you tell us a little bit, first of all, the name of the show. How did you come up with this idea of Make Way for Berthe Weill?
So, Berthe is born in 1865 into a rather modest family with 7 siblings, all of whom were born in the first arrondissement. And the father, as you can see, was a rag picker. The mother was a dressmaker. And so all the kids were sent out to work. First of all, as a girl, you couldn't get formal education past the age of 10. And secondly, the family needed to have all the kids contribute to the family welfare. So because she had been rather sickly as a child, rather than sending out to be trained as a seamstress like the mother, the family decided she would be better off apprenticing at a cousin, Salvatore Mayer, who was sold antiques and prints and paintings on 5 Rue de Lafitte, which was in the 9th in Montmartre, which was at the very, very heart of the art district at the time. It's called the Rue of Les Rues des Tableaux. It was where all the galleries, the important galleries, were clustered. So, and Monsieur Mayer was a very colorful figure. We learned from Ambrose Volard's memoirs that he wore a fez and slippers, and he hung out and loved talking about art. And Berthe worked for him for some 15 years. And when he dies, she decides to open up her own shop. And she does. It's not that successful. And what's absolutely key is that she meets Pedro Mignac, a Catalan businessman who comes to Paris in 1900 and brings along with him a number of young Catalan painters, including Picasso. So in 1900, Berthe buys 3 works by Picasso. That gets her going. And, so she's still struggling with her small shop. Madame Mayer convinces the family to give her dowry so she can start this business. And Mignac says, why don't you really just devote yourself to contemporary art? And she does. So as you can see, in 1901, she opens it up. So her business card, which we just had seen previously by Lobel Riche, was designed. She gets all hands on board. She writes in POW, they transformed the little antique shop into a more respectable looking gallery. They hung fabric. Mignac is painting. She's, organizing everything else. And they get this artist, Lobel Riche, to make a carte de visite, a business card. And you can see that she's advertising what she's going to be selling there, which are paintings and drawings and prints, and the École Neo-Moderne paintings, graver in miniatures. And on the bottom right, you can barely see it in black on the gray. It says Place aux Jeunes. So here it's a clarion call. She's saying, make way for the young. In other words, she's going to be showing young emerging artists, les jeunes, as she calls them, and it's their place, it's their space. So I was talking with a friend the other day in the gallery about, how hard it is to translate Place aux Jeunes, both jeune and both Place aux Jeunes, but it's a clarion call. It's almost like saying, hey, make way. This is what I'm going to be doing. So she's very, very direct about her intentions.
Indeed. And she is, just to underline what you said, is she's the first woman who dedicates herself to art, to selling art, not the antiquities, which previously had been what Maillard did. Then the other thing too is that she dedicates herself to the youth, to the young emerging. And when you say young, and this is of course an interesting point that Samon makes, is not necessarily because they're very young. She's born in 65 and Matisse is born in 69. They're older than Picasso, who are born in the 80s. So for everyone here, please pay attention to the dates, because most of the artists are born in the 80s, 1880s, and they're younger than her, 20 years. Also, she had the temerity to show the Dreyfus affairs. This was courageous. She had that one opportunity. Tell us a little bit about her decision, which is in your show, about putting Dreyfus images in her gallery.
Well, she writes in Pau that France was divided in two. This was the turn of the century. The Dreyfus affair starts in 1896, if I remember my history correctly. It's hugely controversial, and she writes about it. She said it was, it was a challenging times. And what's so interesting for us looking back now is that the artists really took sides. So some artists became Dreyfusards, they supported Dreyfus, and the false accusation that he, as a top level army officer, was selling secrets to the Germans. The army frames him, brings him to trial. And then there are other artists who supported him, like Degas and Renoir and others. So the artists were split in two. And she also writes a lot about how in the early days of her gallery, she was showing a lot of images for journals and drawings and works by illustrators. So this is the golden age of the poster. It's the golden age of these periodicals that engage amazing artists like Toulouse-Lautrec and Steinlen and many, many others to illustrate, it's color lithography. And these prints and these drawings and pastels and by artists were what I call the bread and butter. She could sell them for much less, hefty prices. It kept that's how she was able to make the rent each month. So there's a section in our presentation of the show, which is going on to the Montreal Museum of Art in the Orangerie in Paris, that's devoted to the illustrators. And so that's a long way. Sorry, Beth. That's a long way of getting around to the fact that, a lot of the artists were making images, either supporting Dreyfus or accusing Dreyfus. So she illustrates, and she puts some of these original illustrations in, including this painting. This was unusual. We actually tried to get the painting for the show, but couldn't lend it. They wouldn't lend it. It's a major work in the museum where it resides.
But you have it in the show that you have that one section in which you can see Dreyfus,
yes,
the posters and so forth, which also goes to her marketing the poster. So it's really courageous of you to put it in that particular show. So, and now the Jewish Museum in Paris has a Dreyfus show as well. So it's a very timely overlap with the Jewish Museum in Paris. So just to finish up with the fact that she moved around, so she went from the Victor Massé, and then she moved to her gallery again in 1907 to Thibaut, and then back to Lafite. So she moved around a bit, and then she had to close by 1940 during World War II, when there was, of course, the anti-Semitism had come with the Nazi occupation. And then this is what's really a beautiful, unfortunate end, but a beautiful response to her fidelity to all of these great artists, that they had the auction. So tell us a little bit about the end of her life. I have
sure.
to jump forward.
So as Beth said, she moved 4 times. Her last gallery is on Rue Saint-Dominique in the 7th. And we're still not 100% clear about how she managed to avoid deportation because, of course, there were many, many deportations of Jews by the French government at the time, by the Germans. And so we thought at first she might have gone out to the countryside, but it appears she was hiding in plain sight, that she had just hunkered down in her apartment. And so it's obviously very difficult times. Her health declines. She had started out with having had a hip injury at the beginning of the occupation, which didn't get any better, I don't think. And the story picks up again because, you know, at this point, we don't have her account. I mean, Pont d'Enloy, POW, was really essential for giving us so much information and has proved to be generally very reliable, as unlike some other memoirs. But she emerges after the war. She's destitute and poor health. And by 1946, in December, a number of collectors and artists got together and said, we really want to thank her and pay back the fact that she supported us so early in her career. So over 40 artists contribute works for an auction that's held on December 12th. And it included, you know, even Giacometti, who actually never showed with her, contributes either money or works of art, along with Picasso, Braque, Pissarro, Picabia, Dufy, Derain. I mean, the whole lot. You know, again, some who became famous, some who didn't, but they all pitch in, and they are able to raise the equivalent of $130,000, which goes towards keeping her for the last 5 years of her life in a retirement community with medical assistance and help.
Fabulous, wonderful. And just to add, in 1948, there was another event for her, which was at the Academy Raymond Duncan. So she knew, I mean, Raymond Duncan is the brother of Isidore Duncan. Some people may know that name. So her range of acquaintances was vast, and so, many celebrities. But let's get to the show. What I would like everyone to understand is the show has many themes. You bring up the jeunes, which are these artists whose reputations are known, and you bring so much from the École de Paris of artists who were very well known at their time and are known for people who go to Paris and maybe go to the City Museum of Paris. And then there are women artists. You bring forward how she supported so many women artists whose names are not well known to most audiences in America. And you also brought up, as we've talked about briefly here, her situation as a Jewish person in Paris during the height of this anti-Semitic moment, which is also timely. So let's begin. Matisse. This is a Matisse that you have in the show. Tell us, how did you find these artworks?
Well, this again, it goes back to Marianne Lemervant and the Berg Foundation. The research grant that we received allowed us to work with, Julie and I to work with, and Robert Parker, who was an indispensable part of the initial team and who contributed a catalog essay to the show. We compiled, primarily based on Marianne's research, a list of 200 works that we were pretty certain went through the gallery. And those were either they were mentioned in Pont d'Enloy or in POW, or their title was in catalogs, the little catalogs that Marianne had assembled, or it mentioned in letters, or there had been a review. So we started off with those, you know, with this list of 200 works. And this was mentioned as having gone through the gallery, been shown in the gallery. So it was on our list from the very beginning. And she was the first dealer to show Matisse in a commercial exhibition. So we have a number of early Matisses. I can't remember if you have other ones.
What I have here is the woman in the violet dress reading. And then this is the big story. This is the huge story about
it is the huge story.
Berthe.
Yeah, so she's, as I said, is the first to buy works by Picasso when he was 19, because he was the youngest and incredible genius from the get-go. And she buys 3 pastels on canvas of bullfighting. She's also does sell Le Moulin de la Galette to Arthur Hook, HUC, the journalist and politician. And Picasso remains a lifelong friend. She writes in Pow that he and his studio mate played a trick, pretended not to be in the studio when she goes to visit, but she's then accompanied by Père Maniac, who makes sure, and again, remains a lifelong friend.
Indeed. So this is not in the show because it's uptown from the gallery, from the Gray Art Museum. So for those people who probably saw the show in 2023, that was dedicated to this particular moment in Picasso's career. So she sells this in 1900 before she has the exhibition, which is in 1902 in the spring. So in the spring, 1902, she probably showed the paintings from his blue period. This is an example. Do we know if this was exactly in that show or just
No, and then early on
approximation?
we realized it wasn't so important because first of all, it was practically impossible to be 100% certain that because not all the works were illustrated. The little catalogs only had the artist's name and title. And for example, we have a wonderful Matisse called Le Chocolatier, or the chocolate pot. And then we found out that, so it was mentioned in the catalog, but then it turns out he did 5 versions. And then we realized it wasn't so important. It's great to know when we tried our best to get works that we were 90% sure had gone through the gallery. But what was more important was telling Berthe's story. So all the works in the show are by artists she did exhibit, and they all are date from when the years that she did show them. So it's more important that the story, and we'll continue to research and try and verify which works went through the gallery. But for the purposes of the exhibition, telling the story became more important.
And this one, I think, probably was in her gallery or a possession because
We don't
it
know
is
if it was in the
signed
gallery, but it
to
was
her.
given by Picasso to her, and
So
it's
this is wonderful.
dedicated on Mademoiselle Weill. So it's a beautiful small drawing that the Musée in Reims had, and we had tracked it down. Marianne had tracked it down and said, this is now in Reims. And so we wrote them to say we wanted to include it, and we show it next to a drawing that Suzanne Valadon also dedicated to Berthe.
Lovely. And that's another way this is very important. It's beautifully curated. Now here is exactly what I'm talking about. This is very exciting. So Medavo Varick Fuller, and there were 3 in the Alvin Ailey show that just closed. So because I saw this at the Gray Museum, I really paid attention to the 3 that were included in the Ailey show. Just so excited. So she's emerged now out of your show as a name.
Yeah,
And
so
I'm
this
so
is
grateful.
Yeah, no, this is one of these remarkable things where you think, oh my God, I can't make this up. So in her very first exhibition, which she writes in depth about in Pow, she includes Meta Fuller, who is an African-American woman sculptor who has come to Paris to study at the Académie Colarossi, but then meets Rodin and takes up sculpture and is mentored by Rodin. So a lot of her work early work was destroyed in a studio fire, but she became an important person within the Harlem Renaissance. There were works by her in the show at the Met. She's also there are works on view by her also in the Flight into Egypt show at the Met now, as well as the Ailey. Yeah.
And I have to get to that tomorrow. So thank you for that, the heads up. And everybody else, if the show closes, Flight into Egypt closes this weekend. The Derain. How did you find this Derain?
So this is one of the works, again, that was on the very, very early list because Marianne had identified it as the only painting by Derain with this title. And so this is at MoMA, and MoMA has been very generous with us and lent us a number of works. So we're grateful to be able to include it in the exhibition.
And this is, and you see Delaunay also, who's in the Orphism show we have up at Guggenheim, but this is his early. This is at the beginning, 1906. It's fabulous to see his early work.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful painting. It was, it was just great to be able to, come across, and the fact that she listed all the artists that she showed with, I mean, the show again couldn't have happened without the fact that Paul Donloy was pretty accurate, a pretty accurate account. We've been able to verify most things. She made mistakes, she misspelled, she got a few dates confused, but generally it's very accurate. And I should remark that, there were a team of 4 curators working on this, so we had all hands on deck to do the research. And so Marianne Lemerval, of course, was a guest curator, and I was joined by Sophia Lois at the Musée de l'Orangerie and Anne Grace at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts.
Yep, this is very important to know because they are, the shows are going to be over there as well. Now you have Dufy, who is a really close friend of hers.
Yeah, she has the most correspondence with Dufy. And I mean, this is also something that was helpful when Marianne was setting up the archives, as she went around and Xeroxed all the letters that Berthe had written to Picasso and to Dufy that were saved in the artist archives. She didn't have archives, but a lot of the artists she showed had archives. So that's how we were able to, find out a lot of information were the letters that she sent to the artists.
And this one is really characteristic of his style. So it's wonderful to see. And I love the way it's 1906, 1906, 1906. So we really have that fauve moment well covered. Another 1906 of a woman not well known to our audiences. Great find.
It was very exciting to get to discover these artists. I'm a total convert and a fan of Emily Charmy, who's a remarkable painter, and whose portrait of Berthe graces the cover of the catalog. But she's a really, really interesting artist who has not received her due. So it's nice that she's getting recognition. My colleagues down at the University of Virginia actually had done a Charmy show early on. And I missed seeing it. It traveled to Chicago to the Renaissance Society. But what's fascinating too is that Charmy and another one of the women artists, Jacqueline Marval, were included in the 1913 Armory Show. So this is not their first, not the first exhibition that their work has been presented in New York. But it's so fascinating how some artists, we stay and we get to know better, and how other artists can slip through the cracks.
Indeed. So here's the Marval. And she's also a find, and I wrote about her. And so therefore, I hope there'll be more work that is presented on her and her story. So this is an extremely important exhibition. Please, everybody see it. It closes March 1st. You're going to see all these artists specifically. Marval was shown early on too.
Yes,
She
very
had a
early on.
great reputation.
Yeah.
And she was looked up to. Apollinaire pointed out how important she was to the group. And of course, again, like Berthe, she was, her reputation seemed to just fall into the shadows. Now, here's a great find that you brought us. Look at this.
Yeah, so this is a 1914 Diego Rivera that was included in Berthe's exhibition, solo show of Diego Rivera. So no, we were thrilled to find this work. He was experimenting with Cubism at the time, and Berthe, there's some very funny passages in Pow where she talks about the two egos of Picasso and Rivera encountering each other, not always smooth sailing.
And I wanted to just show everybody, here is the size of it. So this is just to give you a sense of the installation and all of these important cubists that she had supported. So again, when you go there, you're going to be introduced to names of people like Rivera. You don't remember his cubism. And the second painting here is by Alice Halika. Maybe you've never heard of her. She's got a fabulous repertoire of Cubist paintings. The first one's a Léger, and then in the middle we've got a Lot. So these are major Cubists. Please go, and then you can see a little bit of the vitrines you were talking about that were set up with the photographs and some of the catalogs. It's fantastic there. Now, Modigliani, the big story.
Yeah, so she's, most famous
Scandal.
also for having been the only dealer to give Modigliani a show during his lifetime. And she talks again in Pow how sad it was that he was so drunk most of the time and that he had such a fine mind and was such an interesting painter. But she gives him a solo show, and in it we have image of the catalog. And you can see that there's 4 nudes shown. And again, this is a good example where you see that she only lists the title of the work, not the date, not the dimensions, not the medium. So the gallery at that point was across the street from a police commissioner's office, and a crowd had gathered and was looking in. And the commissioner shuts down the exhibition on opening night, saying that it's obscene because you can actually see individual pubic hairs. So even in Paris, it's shut down, and he's only able to sell a few works. And then, of course, he dies, I think it's a year and a half later. And Paul Guillaume takes up and starts showing and promoting his work, but he's no longer with us.
That's true. This was the end of, well, he died in January of 1920. So yes, it's very, very much at the end of his
Couple of
life.
years, yeah.
And so we can see what was considered to be risque. However, she also mentions that Pascal was risque, and she supported his work tremendously.
Yes. We have a wonderful painting by Pascal of 2 women in bed with each other in the exhibition, along with a wonderful Jules Pascal portrait of his wife, Hermine David.
Ah, here it is.
Yeah.
There she is, Hermine. And then you have Hermine. Yes? So we have Hermine also. So here is a beautiful portrait of her and her work.
Yes, it turns out she's also an amazing graphic artist, and we borrowed 3 prints from the Philadelphia Museum of Fine Arts. And she also was a painter, and I was able to discover at a private collector's home some of the paintings. So we have an additional painting by her. But I think her real strength is as a graphic artist.
Yes, so she's another great discovery. And of course, and this one particularly is, do you think this is Berthe in the middle?
Good question. It could be. Berthe was known to wear tuxes to formal occasions, and a top hat. So it could be, this is actually in Marianne's collection, so we'll have to ask what she thinks.
Yes, and it's got the characteristic glasses as well, which everyone described her with her glasses. Now, I love this painting. This is one of my favorite paintings that belongs to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Oh, God, I own a postcard of this. So tell us about how you're working with the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, but Kees van Dongen, what was the relationship there?
Well, she showed his work very early on as part of the Fauve, and continued to show his work into the 20s and 30s. I mean, what was challenging was also, and we noted this at the very first meeting, was that we were asking to borrow works for a touring show that was going to 3 venues, and many lenders, sometimes museums, but particularly private collectors, don't want to lend works for that long. So there's a core of 50 paintings that will be where the lenders agreed to lend to all 3 museums. But at each institution, it's being adapted for the audiences, the appropriate audiences, or the respective local audiences and international audiences. So it really will, I'm really looking forward to going to both Montreal and Paris to see how my colleagues have presented the works, because it's, as Beth said early on, it's such a rich topic, and there's so many layers of onion peels that you can unwrap. You can tell so many different stories. So I think we're going to learn some more stories as the show travels.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. We'll definitely go up to Montreal, and I plan to be in Paris. I want to see what they'll do. Now the Valadon show. The Valadon show is on in Paris. I just saw it, and you got two excellent ones. So there we are. We're very lucky to have them at the same time as the retrospective at Pompidou. So tell us, this is Suzanne Valadon's portrait of Madame Zamaron, and I want everyone to see this great wall.
Thanks. It's one of my favorite walls too. We
Isn't
have five images of women. There's actually a sixth one off view, but the first two Valadons are paintings by a woman depicting women. We have Emily Charmy depicting herself as another self-portrait, and a very bold and fabulous painting, smoking. And then we have the amazing Van Dongen of the femme fatale lying on the couch with her silk charmeuse dress and four around her shoulders. And then Simon Lévy, one of the artists not so well known, but who is also that Berthe showed in the 20s between the wars.
Exactly. So these are the combination of well-known, not so well-known. And again, you have the most important Cubists. She writes about how much she was appreciative of Cubism in her memoir. So we have the Glaise, which is a late one from the 20s. And we have Chagall. We have some of the great examples from what we call Écho de Paris. So this is an extraordinary one. I really love this one particularly.
Yeah, no, we were very grateful. The estate, the family was very supportive of the exhibition and promised us this real gem of a Chagall.
Yes, this one is just, it's especially in person, I must say. Now back to Dufy to talk about, this is now the end, 1931, not the end of the exhibition, but in the 1930s now we're getting toward a late Dufy. So this one celebrates 30 years of the gallery.
Yeah. And it's starting with the 25th anniversary in 1926, she starts doing annual exhibitions. And this Dufy was painted for a group show called Joie de Vivre. And for these group shows that she would hold every mid-December through mid-January, she would invite all the artists who'd shown with her to submit a work. And this is what Dufy, again, as Beth mentioned, was one of the artists with whom she was very, very close. And he painted this spectacularly beautiful painting.
This is really an outstanding example. And then here we are, 1933, and just a short sample of what's in the exhibition. This is the beginning out of the exhibition, actually. We've gone full circle because this is the first room. And Georges Cars is an artist who she brought in a lot of people from outside of Paris. That's another thing that's really another strand that has to be pointed out.
She was very open to artists of any artist who was pursuing their passion. And she was completely open. And I mean, this is the other story, is she comes from, the lower middle class, and she's in a business, which is usually the gallerists come from moneyed families. Ambrose Vollard is in Paris studying law. Kahnweiler has inherited the gallery from his family. So, the fact that she overcame classism as well, is remarkable.
It's true. A lot of stigma, being Jewish, being a female, being from, yes, a lower class, and also bringing in people which at the time, if you know the literature of the moment, these people were considered to be outsiders to Paris themselves, which would be a stigma for the person who supported them. We know that from studying Salmon, that really actually was a risk for his career. So finally, something to visit when you're in Paris. This is the garden that's dedicated to her behind the Musée Picasso.
It's a little pocket park.
Yeah, it's a little pocket park. It's very, very sweet, but it's a wonderful memory of her relationship with him. So we want to remind everybody, write this down. It closes March 1st, which is sooner than you think, only 2 weeks away. And for those of you who think you know where the Gray Art Gallery is, it's not at NYU in Main Building anymore. Please note that it is at 18 Cooper Square. When did you move the museum?
Gosh, it was about a year and a half ago. I can't even remember. Yes, we moved from 100 Washington Square East in the main NYU's main building, and we branded ourselves as the Gray Art Museum because we'd always been a museum. We do have a collection, but it's like the National Gallery. We were, there was a lot of confusion, so it's a good opportunity for us to remind everybody that we have the remarkable collection of Abby Weed Gray, who herself was an amazingly intrepid and important woman collector who started collecting works by non-Western contemporary artists in 1960. So we have the largest collection of modern Iranian art outside of Iran.
That's true. That's true. And just to remind everybody too, if you cannot get to New York, you have another opportunity if you go up to Montreal. And I recommend that in the summer because it's just magnificent to be up there. And then if you don't get a chance to be in Montreal, put this on your calendar for Paris. It's going to continue from October till January of 2026. So you have opportunities if you can't get to New York right now. And just to remind people, there are programs, wonderful programs associated with the show. Lynn, you're giving a course?
This was with the 92nd Street Y. Once COVID came, they started what they call the round table. So I am giving a talk with them, I think, next week.
Congratulations.
But it'll be very similar to this one.
Okay. Well, anyway, just to let people know if they want to have an interactive panel. And also, if you want to find out about other women art dealers, that's going to be next week on Thursday. And the following week, it's going to be about women artists and I guess primarily women who paint women. That's what Lauren Dimerson's famous for. She wrote a book about it. So I'm looking forward to that.
She's a real expert on Emily Charmy.
She is. Well, I'm looking forward to that. So I've signed up for everything. So just take notes. And for those of you who are here, the recording will help you if you can't remember to look at it again. So we're going to open it up now to questions. Anybody want to ask questions?
Hi, I'm going to look at we have a couple of questions in the chat. We don't have a lot of time, but let me start. First of all, thank you both so much for such an interesting lecture, and thank you for reminding us, or interesting conversation, that the exhibit does close quickly. So we all need to hurry up and see it in New York if we're not going to be in Montreal or Paris. The first question is from Paul Werner, who is asking, truly puzzled that Maurice Barrès is listed among the artists who showed with Weill. Barrès being a writer and a notorious anti-Dreyfusard and neo-fascist, worth asking because Barrès has become a hero to the far right.
Now, this is an interesting question. If I remember correctly, I'm not a specialist of late 19th century art. It's my understanding, again, if I remember incorrectly, that Barrès did a series of fetuses in jars, and who was very political at the time. And I'm assuming Berthe writes about him in POW. So I'm not sure if he showed work, but she certainly knew who he was. And I'm assuming if she did show any work, she always was open to dialogue. So she showed, and again, I'm not 100% sure about this, but also showed pro-Dreyfus and anti-Dreyfus material. She showed the works and the visual dialogue between them. So that's what I know about Barrès and Berthe.
All right, we have a new question here. Hang on a minute. So this question is just, did I hear, I don't know who's asking this question. It's Paul, I think, again. Did I hear that Isadora Duncan was mentioned as showing? Or did you mean Raymond? her brother.
Beth, this was your mention,
No,
is that
that's
there was
just,
a
I
show
just,
at the Academy,
yeah,
Raymond Duncan. That was the only mention.
that's all. It was just to let you know that she knew the Duncans. I don't know if she knew Isadora, but definitely her brother. So wonderful to see how many people she knew in the Paris Cultural Center, right?
So that's so far. We still have a few minutes, everyone, if you want to put a question in. But I had a couple of questions. I've been reading the book, not the Beth Weill Art Dealer of the Parisian Avant-Garde, and there were two things that really struck me. In the book, it mentions that she really wasn't very business savvy, which I guess is neither here nor there. But her choice of the name of her gallery, I thought was something worth mentioning. If you would, can you, Lynn, can you
Sure,
elaborate on
sure.
that?
You're absolutely right. She calls it Gallery B period Vey. She's not announcing that that her name is Berthe in French, Berthe in English. That she's a woman. I think she realized that was going to put her at a disadvantage. So, and also according to Marianne, and I've heard other opinions, the term gallery itself had only been published in the Bottin, the phone book of Paris the year before. But she very much wants to present herself as a businesswoman, but she's also a self-described terrible businesswoman. She would take very modest commissions, like if she's for one example is a painting she sold by Brock for 100 francs. She took a 10-franc commission. She didn't believe in contracts. She understood when the artists she showed went on to better financed and more established larger galleries. And she understood, she kept saying, you can't do contracts. Young emerging artists need to sell their work wherever they can. So she was very open-minded about that. It was really, I think, her passion for artists that drove her, not commercial success, certainly.
Thank you. We have a time for one more question. Could you speak a little, this is from Christine Marsh. Could you speak a bit about Ambroise Volar's criticism of her, helped write her out of history? I don't know.
So this is a little bit of a complicated story, and I'll try and summarize it. But essentially, Ambrose Vollard, who she got to know very well, who also studied, in a way studied, but, hung out at the Galeries Salvatore Mayer, writes a very, very negative article about the collector Isaac de Camondo, and publishes it in Mercure de France in 1916. And she's appalled because Isaac de Camondo had just given a huge gift to the Louvre with lots of money attached, as well as all of his amazing works of art by a wide range of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist artists. So she goes to the Mercure de France office and says, I want to write a rebuttal. And they say, you can't because that'll open us to libel. She self-publishes her own takedown of Vollard and distributes it as a flyer in Paris in 1916. And then when she writes and publishes, when she publishes Pan dans l'Oeil, she reprints it and puts it at the very front of the memoir, along with an introduction by Paul Rabou, which is also a very strange piece. It's a very, very hard to read. So I put it at the back of the translation because I wanted to get right away to Berthe's straightforward voice. But I let readers know that if they want to read it in the order that it's published, you should start with the appendices and then go to Berthe. So it's my theory and that of Marianne's. We both, I think, feel similarly. We don't have any direct proof. But when Vollard publishes his Recollections of a Picture Dealer, which comes out actually in English in 1936 before it's published in French, his revenge was to not mention her at all. So that's, in my mind, where the writing out starts.
Thank you. I think
Thank you.
this
I
is
think
it.
we have a lot of thank yous, very interesting, merci beaucoup, but I think we've run out of time. So can we, everybody, thank you for coming, and thank you to Beth, and thank you to Lynn. And please look at the recording. We should probably have it up tomorrow or the next day, so that you can remember all those wonderful facts about going to Montreal and Paris to catch up on the exhibit if you miss it in New York. So thank you both so much. We've been looking so forward to this presentation, and we're very, very grateful, and it was fascinating. Thank you.
I had fun
Buy the
too.
book,
Thank
everybody.
you.
It's
Thank you,
fascinating.
Beth. Thank you. Alliance
Thank you,
Française.
Lynn. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Take
Bonne
care.
soirée.